1984, we had Operation Blue Star in India. It was systematic because only Sikh families were targeted. It touched Sikhs all around the world, and of course, our family as well. Basically, we became a target of those riots as well. So our house, people started throwing rocks, and my dad basically shifted us to the next door neighbors who were of Hindu religion. They essentially hit us. And my memory of that day is just being underneath their bed and not understanding, lots of confusion in my little brain. I remember poking my head up. What I saw in that very brief moment, there was a window right in front of us, is my dad. He had just gotten hit by a rock that people were throwing. And he took off his undershirt and he just was holding it on his forehead to stop the bleeding. The house was burnt, basically, and my dad refused to hide. So they were up there fighting against, I don't know how many numbers of mobs. And when my dad died, I'm not going to say passed away. I know that's the soft way of saying it, but he didn't pass away. It wasn't it wasn't due to an illness that he was struggling with. He was killed, right? It's not something that's just in the history books. You turn the next page, move on. This is something that is a part of my life each and every day.
Let me start with a brief history lesson today. So in 1984, one of the darkest chapters in modern Indian history unfolded, the Sikh Genocide. Following the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, thousands of Sikhs were brutally killed in state-sponsored violence. Mobs roamed the streets, homes and businesses were set on fire, and families were ripped apart overnight. The attacks weren't random, they were systematic. Voter lists and government records were used to target Sikh households. And for days, the streets of India's capital and beyond were soaked in fear and blood. For many, this is a page in history books, but for others, like our guest today, it was lived reality. At just 5 years old, our guest found herself hiding in a neighbor's house while chaos raged outside. In the midst of it all, her father couldn't escape, and he paid for it with his life. What followed was a journey of survival, of adapting to an entirely new world in Canada while carrying the weight of grief, trauma, and deeply ingrained societal expectations. From being reminded that her family didn't have a son to navigating stigmas around marriage, divorce, and even raising daughters of her own. Her life has been a testament to resilience. But today she stands as a woman who has healed, who has redefined her path, and who is raising the next generation to break free from outdated norms. In this episode, we are diving deep into her journey, how she unlearned, healed, and ultimately found the strength to say, I am enough. Please welcome Jyoti Grewal.
Thank you so much, Gurasys. That was a beautiful introduction.
Thank you. Thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for saying that. I know it means a lot, but very excited to get into your journey and unfold how you have powered through everything that how your life has been. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
All right, Jyoti. So before we get into the serious stuff, I want to start on a lighter note. This episode is part of my season 2, where I'm trying to turn up the fun factor a little bit. So I'm going to start by asking you some fun questions. Okay?
Okay.
So tell me first is, what's your go-to breakfast?
I start with a protein shake, believe it or not.
Okay. Wow.
So all the veggies, the yogurt, I'm trying in this era of my life to look after myself, not only mentally, but also physically. So yeah, that's my breakfast.
Okay. I love that. And share a favorite song or a dialogue or a movie and tell us why it's significant to you.
I think the movie is a Hindi movie. I think it was called Kal, but don't quote me on that because I might have misused the name. But in there, it was an Ajay Devgan movie and it was based on societal issues. And in that movie, he said, "Janwar bhi apna dard samajh sakte hain," basically that animals can even understand their own pain. What is the difference? That humans only feel their own pain and not others, right? Yeah. So that to me is a simple idea, but it speaks so well in all the different things that unfold in society is that if we only felt others' pain like we feel our own, I think the world would be a better place.
Wow. Such a profound interpretation of it. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So next is, if you had to teach one phrase or something in your mother tongue, what would it be and what does it mean?
Oh, that's so interesting. One phrase in my mother tongue, Manima Matuchi.
Uh-huh. And how would
I
you
actually have it
translate that?
tattooed.
Oh, wow.
I have it
Nice.
tattooed on both of my wrists. And essentially, a lot of people ask me about it, right?
Hmm.
Because they see it, it's on the wrist, it's
Of course.
obvious. And for me, it's, roughly translated, it's in the Sikh Ardas, the prayer that we do at the end of every, prayer ceremony. And it's like a path to guidance.
Yeah.
Keep your mind humble. You keep your mind humble, stay in humility, but keep your thoughts and morals high.
Yeah.
So that's something I think because it's tattooed on me, people get asked often. That way it spreads out to the world and those that I come in contact with. It's just
Mm.
something for them to think about.
I like that. Yes. In my case, it's always my name, because it's not
Mm.
something people have heard about different variations of Punjabi names, Manpreet, Harpreet, and all that. But maybe Gurasis was something new to them. So I have always been questioned, okay, what does it mean? What does it symbolizes, or so to say? And maybe initially I never thought about it, but now
Mhm.
it's so much like ingrained in me now, how to say
Yeah.
that, how to communicate that. So I always
Mhm.
like ask that question as well. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I mean, Jyoti is maybe not as unique as Godasis, but it's a name that people often haven't heard, and
Uh-huh.
so it makes you kind of stop and appreciate where you were named and the meaning behind it. And kind of, it's funny, names can often dictate how we walk our path in life, right?
Yeah.
That sort of follows in with you as well. But yeah, for
Yeah.
me too, it's like light. Okay, how do I walk this world, shedding some light, leaving
Absolutely.
some light behind, right?
For sure. Yeah. Your path has been like that, where you have ignited or enlightened, various parts of, I would say, like, even for your children also, you're doing the same thing, lighting the path for them. We'll get into that. But last question in this segment: if you could teleport back to a particular place for a day, where would you go
Hmm.
and what would you do?
Punjab. So I just recently went to Punjab in January, and I would be there sipping my 25th cup of cha,
Of
sitting in
course.
front of the oven, the homemade chulla,
Yeah.
and just sitting there in the most simplicity and having great conversations with the
Mm,
elder members of my family.
of
That
course.
simple bonding that's my happy place.
Absolutely. Yeah, all the happiness is in the simplest things, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I want to take you back to the time you spent in India. I'm talking about your formative years. Tell us anything that you can share about the time before 1984. Yeah.
Before 1984, the unfortunate thing is, and I do think it has to do with our body and brain trying to protect us. So I don't have a ton of memories.
Hmm.
The ones I do have, I call them dreams. They're like in a dreamlike state. So they're not very solid. They're floating images. And I sometimes question myself, like, did that even happen? Or did
Mm.
I just, make it up through Bollywood movies or something like this? So I sometimes confirm with my mom, like, I have this memory, that I was up high on my dad's shoulder, and there was a wedding, a ceremony, but it was dark, and traditional Sikh weddings happen in the light, right? So
Mm.
what is that memory about, mom? And she will say that, yeah, you did. You went to a Hindu marriage ceremony, which happened, when it was darker. So those kind
Aha.
of memories are few and far between. But yeah, that's one core memory that I have is of this wedding. And because I was in the highest spot on my dad's shoulders watching this wedding happen,
Mhm.
that's sort of a core memory that I have from my time there.
Okay. And was that the stigma around, having daughters in the house and no child, was that also sort of introduced to you back then, or maybe it was told to you by your parents?
No. So my dad was actually an educated man of the times in the 70s and 80s.
Hmm.
So at that point, it was just me and my younger sister, who was 2.5 years younger. So when my dad was alive, during that time in India, he was the father of two daughters.
Hmm.
And it was actually my mom that wanted a son, right? That wanted to try again for another child so that she would be able to give us a brother.
I see.
But my dad would always say, I'm happy. I've got two
Hmm.
girls. And he did some foreshadowing in the future because he would say, I want the older one to be a teacher and the
Mm-hmm.
younger one to be a nurse. And those are the careers that me and my sister are in actually at the moment. So
Hmm.
I didn't remember any of that touching me during that time.
Okay. And
Yeah.
also, is there something about maybe India or Punjab that you would like to share with people that people might not know?
The beauty.
Hmm.
I think when people are fed through media, there's a lot of misconception about poverty, about people being uneducated, women's rights, that kind of a thing. And then just actually the physical landscape of the
Hmm.
country, right? So when I went to India, I've got tons of pictures of the beautiful green farms, the water, the animals, and then the way that people actually bask in simplicity, like you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So I would take pictures of, you know, 5 or 6 elderly men just hanging out for 2 or 3 hours, catching up on their
Classic.
day, right?
Yeah.
Classic. And same thing for women in different spots in life. And just the pace of life and the relationship building that happens
Hmm.
because we have time to stand and have a conversation. People are not constantly watching their,
Hmm.
their phone for, oh, I have to be here or there's a meeting. The time to have deep relationships and appreciate the beauty. So going in for a walk every day in those beautiful green fields, that's a core memory. And I think if you went back to Punjab and experienced that, your narrative would change of what you consume through media to be India or what a Punjabi family is or the experience of being in that world is, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah, until unless it's not lived, you would never be able to really understand the depth of it and the feeling of it. Because once you are in those farmland, you really genuinely forget about your phone. You are so much immersed in the air, and so much relaxed you feel, just being there. You don't want to do anything. You just want to sit and lie down sometimes there.
yeah, the sunsets are like so much more vivid and the
Hmm.
sun rises and then
Yeah.
you can hear the nature, right? The birds and the peacocks in the air and it's beautiful and it literally catches your breath.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right, I'm getting into the nostalgia of it, but moving on, moving on
Sorry
from
about
that.
that. Time to book a trip, right?
Yeah, I actually just came back like 2 months ago, so
Okay.
so it's very fresh for me. So I think I'll get more into the feeling of it, like going back again. So it's hard
Yes.
to get over. I'm still on the recovering phase. So
Yeah.
okay, so moving on, obviously tell us about the events of October 984 and how it impacted your family, your life at such a young age. Tell me about that.
Mhm. So you gave a bit of the history
Yeah.
lesson. And no matter how many times I talk about this story, it still shakes you up a bit, right? Your stomach
Yeah.
turns, especially if you have lived in living experiences. Like you said, it's not something that's just in the history books. You turn the next page, move on. This is something that is a part of my life each and every day.
Yeah.
So in 1984, for some listeners, we had Operation Blue Star in India, which was Indira Gandhi was the prime minister at that time. There was political upheaval happening between opposing parties wanting something different, and her troops, let's say militia, stormed into the Golden Temple,
Yeah.
and lots of innocent praying people who were there for religious purposes, men, women, children, died. And so that was sort of where it started in 1984. And when I talked to my mom, she talks about my dad, and her members of her family sitting around and listening to this and saying, why is this happening? Because those people that were in the Golden Temple at that time in Amritsar, they were innocent. They were there
Yeah.
for religious purposes, right? And to lose their life. And some jumped into wells because to escape the gunshots. And,
Yeah.
there was no respect done in terms of you don't go into a gurdwara without your head covered, without taking your shoes off. So just the whole,
Disrespect.
yeah, it was just, so it touched, I think, Sikhs all around the world. And of course, our family as well. And what happened a couple of months following that sort of traumatic event was two of Indira Gandhi's bodyguards were Sikh. So they assassinated her in retaliation for this. And that just opened up this whole can of horrific events that basically unfolded overnight. And we hear about the Delhi riots. My family was living in Madhya Pradesh at that time. My dad had a very successful trucking business there. So we were one of the few Punjabi Sikh families that were living there. And I think you mentioned in your introduction that it was systematic. Absolutely. Because only Sikh families were targeted. So we lived amongst, and again, I don't remember a lot of it. It's basically from information my mom, who was in her 20s at that time, shared. And essentially, my dad had come home for lunch. And I do remember stirrings as a kid. You feel the energy in the house shift as a 5-year-old, thinking something is up. Like people are upset about something, but not understanding. And now, of course, through conversations with my mom, it was my dad saying, look what happened. You know, Indira Gandhi is dead, and there's all of these riots that are happening. And then basically we became a target of those riots as well. So our house, people started throwing rocks, and we were a joint family. So my grandparents, my dad's younger brother, my uncle, two of us sisters, my mom, we all lived together. And my dad basically shifted us to the next door neighbors who were of Hindu religion. So that's where the discrepancy in humanity is you can't label everybody that is of Hindu religion as a bad person. Because of them, I'm here today. My sister is alive. My mom is alive. My grandparents are alive. They essentially hit us. And my memory of that day is just being underneath their bed and not understanding, lots of confusion in my little brain. I remember poking my head up, and I just remember my mom hitting me on the back of my head, saying, get back under the bed. But what I saw in that very brief moment, there was a window right in front of us, is my dad on top of our roof of our house. And he had just gotten hit by a rock that people were throwing. And so he took off he was wearing an undershirt. He was relaxing at home for lunch. And he took off his undershirt and he just was holding it on his forehead to stop the bleeding. And then I was shoved under the bed again. So when you talk about core memories, that's a core memory. And then anything after that is through my mom's eyes that I remember or I'm told. I have newspaper clippings of what our house looked like. There was so much rubble thrown that there's no space left. The house was burnt basically, and my dad refused to hide. And my uncle refused to hide. So they were up there fighting against, I don't know how many numbers of mobs. That eventually we made our way back to Punjab. We didn't live in Madhya Pradesh again, specifically my mom and us, because it was just too traumatic for her to go back. But my grandparents and my uncle continued the business there, and we lived in Punjab thereon in. So yeah, that's a brief synopsis through my 5-year-old eyes at that time.
It's such a, I can't even fathom how that 5-year-old must be feeling, like you said, you can really feel the energy in the room and the stirrings happening around. And now you are at a position where you can actually reflect and talk about it. But I think a lot of trauma, a lot of things were sort of immersed or sort of absorbed by that 5-year-old at that tender age, right? And, I want to ask you, following that, you were telling me briefly in our previous introduction also that the life became very, very hard after that, right? And after your father's passing, there were lack of support to your mother, the financial, emotional, and always a man has to accompany them no matter what the decision they want to make in their life, right? Talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So we were two sisters, like I had mentioned earlier. And when my dad died, I'm not going to say passed away. I know that's the soft way of saying it, but he didn't pass away. It wasn't it wasn't due to an illness that he was struggling with. He was killed, right? So when he died, my mom was pregnant with our youngest sister. She was about 3 months pregnant. So after his death, she had a third daughter. My youngest sister was born. And that event itself, like my mom talks about, when my youngest sister was born, they lied to her, the people, her family members, and said, oh, the baby didn't survive,
Oh.
because they thought she wouldn't be able to deal with the trauma of having another daughter, having
Mm.
just recently lost her husband. And somehow everyone thought that my dad was going to come back in the form of this third baby, that it
Mm.
was only right
I see.
for that to happen. So the hopes were high that the third child would be a son. And when that didn't happen, but my mom says, even in the hospital, when they were telling me this baby had passed away, I said, give her to me. She knew
Mm.
that it was a daughter. And she said, I actually felt so much love for that child that she's very protective of my sister to this day, because that was like my dad's last gift to our family, was this baby, right? So that sort of kind of tells you what she was dealing with in terms of society in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
The role of a son, and how yet another daughter was considered, oh no, like, why
Mm.
does God hate us that he gave us another daughter? He could have spared her and given her a son, for all of the pain of losing her husband.
Mm-hmm.
So that narrative kind of continued on
Mm-hmm.
with all of our lives, with my mom, with my sisters, of like hearing, oh, you're three girls. Such a burden to be one of three girls. We have to marry you, right? I know that there's sayings like having a daughter is like watering another man's garden,
Mm.
because she doesn't stay yours, which now this is something that really makes my stomach churn when I
Mm-hmm.
hear that, as a mother of two daughters,
Yeah.
right? They are nobody's garden. They're not a possession to be had.
Yeah.
So the narrative of that, my mom had a grade 8 education. She wasn't able to support herself by being employed, that kind of a thing. So lost her husband, had three daughters. So that was kind of the reason that when my adoption came up, my dad's aunt wanted to adopt me. It was sort of like helpful to her to have one less mouth to feed, one less responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Although then there was also that tug inside of her of giving up her child, right?
Mm-hmm.
After very recently losing her husband. So there was a lot of upheaval in her life at a very young age. She was only about 26 at that time.
Mm.
But yeah, so I came to Canada at the age of 7, and I lived with my aunt and uncle, my dad's brother, and my dad's sister and brother-in-law, and my mom raised my two younger sisters in India.
Mm-hmm.
Through this patriarchal society that was made her dependent on anybody else, to usually a male figure. So that ended up being her brother, my uncle, who is like a father figure in our lives, because he sort of took on that
Mm.
role,
Okay.
whether it was registering, us into a school, or going to get groceries, or any type of event that involved leaving the house, basically, to conduct business in society. You needed a male to accompany you for it to be okay, because women at that time didn't really go out and do things
Mm.
independently.
Yeah.
So,
I just want to share a personal story here. So I'm the youngest of my in the family. I have two elder sisters, and they are decade older than me. Both of them, 10 and 11, 10 and 8.
mhm,
Sorry. And at that time, I heard it from my sisters, and I heard it from my mother as well, that
mm,
everybody wanted me to have a son. And it was
mhm,
such a big conversation in the 90s, 80s as well. And the if I sometimes I think about it, and I see that, look at me today, I being a son, I'm here in Canada, and
mhm.
if anything happens to my parents ever, whether they were sick or something like that, my
Yeah.
sisters are always the first one to go and run and really be with them.
Mhm.
Look at the irony of things here.
Yeah.
Craving for that son, having that son, this mentality deep rooted in our society.
Mhm.
Yes, things are changing, but I think there's still a long way to go, especially in some of the rural sections of the society in India. And
Yeah.
to some extent, even in the urban section, I see those conversations happening very like hush hush, but they do
Mhm.
happen. They do happen. And I really hope that these things change. And I do reflect upon that couple of times, throughout my journey here in Canada, that look at me, that there were times it's going to be 7 years for me, and my father has been sick a couple of times, my mother has been sick, and my sisters were the first one to run and go help them, or be with them. So yeah, this is the I don't even know how to like put this in words, but this is such a like a personal um anecdote I'm sharing here, which I might have not before. Just
Mhm.
because you were sharing such a vulnerable side to yourself, I could not stop myself from sharing that you don't really run after this orthodox thinking. It's time to go past that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I think voices like yours are important. Voices of sons are important to say, hey, a son is not the end all be all. And
Yeah.
daughters are capable, just as capable of taking care of parents. And like I sometimes sit and reflect on this and I think, okay, in past generations, maybe I can understand this need because a daughter got married, moved into her in-laws' home to take care of them. And that was her purpose. And then if you had a son, some other woman, somebody else's daughter would come and take care of your family. So I understand why in the past it was necessary because it was sort of
Sure.
your old age plan and that kind of a thing. But things are different now. Women are educated, and there's no longer this pressure of being owned by somebody. Like your husband's family doesn't own you, and really neither do your parents. It should come from the heart. And this unfair thing of like having a right over a son but not a right over a daughter. I
Yeah.
know there's songs that are still sung today, right? New songs come out and it's all about the daughter's role versus the son's role. And that keeps perpetuating the same myth to the next generation again, right? So
Absolutely.
I think we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk.
Yeah. True.
So people like to say these things. There's
Yeah.
no difference. I mean, I've heard it in many different circles. There's no difference between boys and girls. But when it comes to reality, people want a son
More than
in our culture.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
there's only very few, I think, that really truly are okay with just having daughters, and then that's it, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just wanna now pivot towards your journey to Canada. And you were
Okay.
7, I believe, when you came with your aunt to Canada. Tell us, do you have any recollection of your initial days? Let's just say like initial years, how was it like just coming here? And do you remember any culture shocks? Language, how was that, handling that like?
Yeah. So I actually came with a friend of my aunt's. My aunt and uncle were in Canada. So and back in the 80s, this was in 87, there weren't a lot of people it wasn't like as much of a norm for people to go to, these Commonwealth countries.
Yeah.
So I guess the family found this friend of my aunt's who happened to live in the same town in BC. And I was booked a ticket to go with her. And I remember being outside of the airport, asking my mom, where am I going? And she said, you're going to visit your aunt. You're going to her bin. You're going to her
Mm,
village. And so it was made in my mind to sound like just a short trip. I'll be back in a week or two. Right. So that was sort of the first lie, if you will. And I
yeah.
know why my mom did it. It was just to make it a bit softer
Yeah.
on me and probably on her as well.
Yeah.
Although my innocent mind protected me, right? I had the shroud of childhood to protect me from a lot of the things, but she didn't have that. So she suffered far greater in those years, I would say, than I did. Just because I was a kid, I was distracted easily. I went on with my life. Of course, I missed her, but I was also very young. So I became immersed in my new life here.
Mm,
Um, and some of that was at the very initial stages. I went to an English medium school in India, but it still was a struggle when I came here to understand.
mm,
So I took some tutoring, but because as children, they're like sponges, you can absorb the language really, really quickly.
mhm.
Um, I didn't struggle too much for too long, maybe just a couple of months.
Okay.
And then I was into the speaking and having friends and that kind of a thing. But it was a rural farming town. And so there weren't a lot of people that looked like me. We had indigenous peoples,
Okay.
and then we had white folks. And then there was just me and one other cousin that were the brown kids in
Mm,
my class,
mm,
right? So there was some racism, that happened, and there was some othering that happened at a very young age. So I have some memories of that, and then just also trying to navigate the east and west boats. I always say, like I felt like I had my foot in
mhm.
one in each boat. the home world where it was very, the Punjabi culture, food, dress, all of this. And then when you left at school, that was a different world. And so you're trying to find yourself in between both of those.
Yeah. And where was it? Where in Canada?
In BC, so in the Okanagan.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
And how was your high school like? You spoke briefly about racism and othering and everything. Do you have
Yeah.
any vivid incidents that you can share with us?
I think it was not one specific incident. It was sort of, when there's the in group and the out group, you just know that you are not part of quote unquote the norm. You are part of the other group. You dress differently. So, I wasn't up on the trends of clothing that the other kids were wearing. And sometimes I wasn't allowed. When all the other kids would go to the movies, I wasn't allowed to go to the movies. So I grew up in quite a strict household. And then part of that was being a girl. Girls aren't supposed to be out. Girls aren't supposed to do this. They're not supposed to do that. Be in the kitchen, learn how to make food. You have to serve your in-laws. So that sort of mentality. And then also when I had friends who were not Punjabi or Indian, in order to survive, I would just lie to them about why I couldn't have a sleepover, about why I couldn't go see the movies, have a boyfriend, all of this stuff. I just made up stories because in that time, I guess that was my best defense mechanism, is I was too ashamed of telling them the truth, that I'm not allowed to do this. This is not okay in my culture. So there was that kind of a thing. And then just like my formal name, I went by my formal name, Sukhjit, in schools. And just the teachers' reactions to my name every time they would come across it in the attendance list, they would make that, I call it a constipated face when they came to my name, because it was like, what do I do with this? And I was so embarrassed. So I would just put up my hand because I knew it was my name that they were getting stuck on. Every single class, every new teacher, year after year after year. So it was that sort of like covert forms of othering that I recall, where it was like sending me messages all the time that you're different. You're not like the norm. There's something weird about you. And you start to, after a while, believe some of those things, right?
Yeah.
In my first couple of jobs, I actually wore a name tag that said Jyoti on it, Jod, because I just was tired of people mispronouncing my name, and I gave in to that narrative that was out there. So,
what's the worst pronunciation you have heard of Sukhjit?
Oh, Sukhjit, Sokhajit, like I don't know. Maybe that's like more my Dadi's impression, but it was just butchered. Now Jyoti, I've heard goatee, and someone expecting a Japanese person, and so that was a shocker to me. Or Coyote is another one.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And it was just always kind of makes you cringe and laugh at the same time. It's like, just ask me. You have a capability to pronounce such hard things like fettuccine Alfredo and Tchaikovsky and all
Timothy
of these other
Chalamet, you can say that.
Yeah. It's like, Jyoti is not, it's like, now I just say, I don't expect you to learn my language in order to, make your tongue turn a certain way. But if you even get close, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So if you can't say Jyoti, a lot of people call me Jyoti. That's fine.
Yeah. I think it's about seeing the intention it's coming from, but they're actually making an effort to learn it or ask you for it, or they're just ignoring it,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, now I feel unseen. Like, where am I in this conversation? Because you've just taken away from me that word that I've heard the most since birth.
Absolutely.
It's my identity. And if you don't say that well, then what else about me do you respect and honor?
Yeah, totally. You mentioned about the racism thing. I think what I'm understanding it was more of like an underlying factor that wasn't direct on your face, but you could really understand, okay, something is coming my way, and it's not something which I'm feeling good about. Tell me, I often have the discussion on the podcast with first generation of immigrants, and since you sort of lived like this similar life, yes, you were born in India, but you were at a very young age when you came to Canada and living here as well. They always tell me that there was always this alteration between living a life outside of the house and then coming back to the house. Like, I remember once one person said that outside I was like a certain Canadian. I am native, but then I come back to my house and then I'm again like Punjabi and I'm again Indian. And I'm sort of like,
Mhm.
switching between these two personalities. Did you at any point have that sort of like switching personalities that, okay, where do I actually belong? Who is
Yeah,
Jyoti? Did you ever question that?
yeah, absolutely. I actually had a physical change. So when I came into the house, I would
Okay.
change into a suit.
Okay.
So I physically put on my Punjabiness, right?
Hmm.
As soon as I stepped above the threshold. So when you're talking about this, I just thought, yeah, for sure. I had a very clear distinction. Pants are for outside of the house.
Wow.
Inside the house, you wear a Punjabi suit.
Hmm.
So I physically would change, and that was my evening weekend attire at home,
Hmm.
which then speaks into the language you speak at home, the food you eat, what is okay and not okay,
Hmm.
and then outside, you put on your pants, take off your suit, and now you're talking like them, and you're having similar experiences, and really trying hard to fit in. And the best analogy I can think of is trying to put a square peg into a round hole, where you're
Absolutely.
constantly trying to make these identities align, and they never quite do, nor inside nor outside the house. So
Hmm.
you're now I think I've tried to create this third middle ground of life for myself, where I pick and choose pieces of both worlds that feel right to me, and I won't say they're right for everybody, but it's what is my truth and what
Hmm.
I've decided to embrace based on my experiences. And it just felt sometimes like they were at such opposing
Hmm.
odds, that it was crushing to be in the middle of that.
Yeah. And did you ever speak about it to somebody in the house or just a friend or somebody? It's anybody, maybe somebody in India.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
No.
I didn't see my family until I was basically an adult.
Hmm.
Like I was done my university education. I did go back when I was 10
Hmm.
for 2 years. And then I came back at, I think, 12 and a half, 13. Then I didn't go back until I was done university. So keep in mind that I didn't grow up with my mom and my
Hmm.
sisters. So I
Yeah.
didn't have that relationship with them. And then here as well, I was in a household where children are to be seen and not heard. So that was sort of the narrative there. So the short answer is no. I didn't start speaking about it probably until I was in university, and
Hmm.
just having exposure to other people's ways of living and realizing, wait a minute, this this life that I've been living is not quite it. There's other ways to live, and recognizing that. So,
Yeah.
and of course, now I speak about it very, very
Yeah.
openly.
Of course.
But yeah,
Yeah. The line that you said that the children in the house are seen and not heard, it just hit me because it's the reality of so many households in, I would say, like the Indian
yeah,
households, right?
yeah. Possibly immigrant households, because I hear this. I've
Sure.
worked, over 2 decades with immigrants from all over the world, and that seems to be the way. Like children, you respect your elders, you don't talk back, you don't question anything, you do as you're told.
Absolutely.
It's like a one-way street,
Hmm.
and um, that always has felt a little bit like, but I'm a person too.
Hmm.
As a child, I've even felt that I have opinions, and why can't I question anything?
Hmm.
And even if you did it in the most polite way, it was still taken as you're being rude.
Yeah.
You're questioning the authority of parents or elders. Right?
Yeah.
So
Along with all this that you have just told us, was there at any way the weight of carrying your past that came into the picture?
in my childhood specifically, or up until this day and time.
I would say up until the time where you were building your life in Canada, initial years.
Initial years, yeah. Even within the Punjabi community, people would look at me and know, and it was almost with that. I heard the word "bachari" a lot
Hmm.
in my childhood, and that means poor one, right? A poor thing, poor little one, or poor girl. Rough translation, and that sort of was my story. Poor
Hmm.
thing. She lost her dad, was killed. She doesn't have a brother. She doesn't have a father. Now she's living here, with her aunt and uncle. And I didn't feel like a
Hmm.
bajati,
Hmm.
right? So that's still one of my, let's call it trigger words, is don't victimize me. If something happens to me, I don't control that,
Absolutely.
and it's not my identity.
Hmm.
So yes, I my family was victimized by the 1984 riots, but we are also more than that,
Hmm.
right? Complete people who are living full lives. We are, happy. And of course, this tragedy is always with us, but it shouldn't define us as that's the family, the
Hmm.
1984 family. So that's where my past, I would say, it's less so now. But
Hmm.
growing up, small town. That was I could hear murmurings. You go to the gurdwara, you hear people, and you can feel eyes staring at you even behind your head, and that
Hmm.
that's what they're thinking, and that's your definition in their eyes. And you can't really be anything more than that.
Yeah, it becomes sort of like your identity, this is what
Yeah.
this person is like. On another note, I just want to know, did you pursue any hobbies growing up in Canada?
um, no, not
Okay.
really. Is cleaning a hobby?
Uh, that's like a necessity. I don't know. You're just forced to do that.
Yeah, I think that's my hobby. I think even now, I'm a clean freak, and maybe because it was such a strict household that you're not allowed to leave. I just cleaned. And so up until this day, I've reflected on it many times, is that I keep my house meticulous. Some people will come and say it looks like a show home. Or
Hmm.
do you even live here? And I think it goes back to when you can't control other things in life. Cleaning was one thing that helped me control something, to be
I see.
organized, right? So I would say even now it impacts my mental health when the house is dirty, things are not organized. Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So was that a hobby? I guess that was my hobby because that's what I did with my spare time,
Hmm.
studying and cleaning.
Okay. So I'm also a little bit like you. I'm not diagnosed with OCD, but I think I have that like a
You pretty much
minor.
have diagnosed yourself.
Yeah. I'm just curious about one more thing. Since you did have, like, your obviously your aunt is Punjabi, and you were surrounded by a lot of Indian Punjabi families as well.
Mhm,
How would you say the culture, apart from this, orthodox thinking, patriarchal thinking, it impacted
mhm.
you? I'm talking about the songs and the music, and how did that sort of impacted your upbringing?
Yeah, it was definitely a big part of my
Hmm.
life. We had, so I mentioned I went back to India for a couple of years. And so I learned how to read and write Punjabi.
Okay.
And then when I came back, we would have, I think the newspaper was called Indo Canadian Times, that
Hmm.
was delivered. And I made the effort to read it, because I
Hmm.
wanted to stay on top of Punjabi, like to know how to read and write it. And I still can fluently. But also, like, movies were a big part, or attending functions where dance and all of that was. We had, my uncle was into hosting singers. So we
Okay.
had, like, Muhammad Siddiq, Ranjit Kaur living at our house whenever they
Uh-huh.
would do a show in Canada. So I have pictures of myself as a young child hanging out with them. So music is a big part of my life today. I love to dance. I love gidda. I love bhangra. So I've made the effort to learn all the folk songs. Whenever I went back to India,
Okay.
I'd be singing about things and then people would joke, "You've never seen these things, but you're saying it as if you've lived the life here," right? But it was just, I love those pieces of our culture, and I've embraced them. I still do it to this point. And both my daughters are in Gidda and Bhangra as well.
Oh,
So just
wow.
passing on the beauty and the fun and the connection that is a part of our culture.
Since you mentioned your daughters, I want to talk very briefly about your marriage, and also, like, from there on you got onto your healing journey, following your divorce, right? And this one question I have for you is, tell me that what were some of the expectations placed on you as a daughter that you realized later you needed to unlearn? Tell me about that.
Mm. This whole being somebody else's property.
Hmm.
And those words weren't used, but that was the message. You learn to cook because your duty is to serve others. And it wasn't serving in a nice way. It wasn't like a seva way. It was more of a submissive way.
कि कुड़ियां इदां ही
As
करदियां ने, sort of.
Yeah. Like you ask for permission, don't do this. And a lot of things and whenever I ask, can I do this after you're married? Can I go here after you're married? So your freedom became linked to a man, this unknown face somewhere in your future from a very young age. And then I do believe that even today, girls will often sometimes marry young, end up marrying the wrong person because they're really hungering for that freedom that parents don't give while they're in there under their roof. And that is unfortunate.
Mm,
I think it ends up in girls marrying for the wrong reason, just to get out, just to have a little bit
yeah.
of fresh air. And then that often means you go from a ditch into a well, right? Because you don't get what you need when you're with your parents. And that I think is a parent's job is you're not raising someone's daughter-in-law, you're raising your child. Leave it there. And the values come, right? So that's sort of been part of my own reflective journey is like, why was I told all of these things? Why wasn't I taught that I need to learn to cook so I could feed my own self,
Mhm.
not to feed this future family, right? Which is, then there's nothing wrong with that. But the reasons that you do it should be clear.
Hmm, I see. And talk a little bit about your daughters also, right? Since you are sort of instilling that a different version of reality to them, which was not told to you growing up, and
Mhm.
also since you remarried after that, there were certain stigmas around that as well. Tell me about the kind of resistance that you face.
I would say resistance. I stayed in my first marriage. It was to a Punjabi man because of the messaging that I had received in my own life. You marry and it's for life, and you leave your husband's home on your deathbed, kind
Uh-huh.
of thing. Like that was sort of the narrative, and it's for life. And I agree with it to a certain extent, but it depends on what that married life looks like. Is it at the risk of your mental health, your physical, emotional, financial, all of that well-being? What are you giving? And so for me was, looking at my two daughters and saying, what is the message my life will send to them? And I didn't want to be a hypocrite. So I
Mm,
couldn't tell them to do something that I hadn't done, that I didn't have the guts to do. So that sort of became the flame for me is I'm not going to be a liar in their eyes. I'm going to do something that I stand by, that I've done. I'm going to go through the fire, and if tomorrow they need to go through the fire, then they know that here's somebody who has that lived experience of it.
yeah.
So a lot of it was, I would say, the things that I expected my family not to understand, but they were amazing. My family was like, why didn't you tell us anything years ago?
Mm,
They were 150% on board. So it was more my own misconceptions based on societal input that I
mhm.
had all of these years, that I was actually kind of surprised to have my own small family support. Now, in terms of wider society, sure, people make assumptions, and it's usually the woman that is
Mm,
blamed.
I see.
She probably didn't try as hard enough, or I can't believe she's doing this at this point in her life. She's not thinking about her kids. She's being selfish. That narrative of just like, suck it up. It's,
Mm,
the man will change after a certain amount of time or with old age. And it's a short life, but it's a long life when you're with the wrong person. And if you're feeling, a certain way every day, that time is not that short.
yeah.
And then what happens to yourself, you lose yourself. So I didn't know who I was,
Yeah.
and it's taken time to find out who I am without these layers of other people's expectations around me.
Yeah. One of my guests who was talking about a similar struggles as yours, she said, I don't want to be a footnote in someone else's story. And I love
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. When I love quotes. So if we talk long enough, I'm sure I'll throw in some other quotes in there, whether they're Punjabi or English. But it's basically realizing that that part of your story has a comma behind it, not a period. It's going to
Absolutely.
continue, right? And in my mind, it had a period, that it was done. This is it. I made a decision. Now, till death do us apart. And that was it, right? So also recognizing it's a comma.
Mhm.
You have life ahead of this. This is only one chapter. You can start the second chapter
Yeah.
after this horrible thing that's happened.
Yeah. I also see it like at that time, you did not have any certain live examples in front of you where people were standing up against this. And also, I feel like there was a lack of safe space for you to talk about your doubts and your curiosities and your sort of like questions that you had, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And this is something that my daughter, my oldest daughter, asked me. She was probably 12 or 13. And even in her young mind at that time, she asked me one day, Mama, it must have been really hard for you. I don't see, like in our gatherings and stuff, I don't see a lot of people like you that are divorced. How hard was it for you?
Hmm.
Because she's right.
Wow.
In many of our circles and our gatherings and family friends and stuff, I'm the anomaly. And for her to recognize that at a young age says something as well, that it's that obvious, the precedent set for us to follow,
Yeah.
that you suffer in silence, you suffer behind closed doors, and you put on this happy face, and keep going, because it's all about keeping up that appearance
Yeah.
for others.
I think that observation also spoke about your upbringing and the kind of morals and principles you are instilling in them. So hats off to you, Jyoti. I love that.
Thank you so much. That is one of my biggest tasks in life, is to be a good mother and to pass on generational healing and
Yeah.
not generational trauma.
Yeah. And something else I asked you in our previous conversation was, what would you like to say to people, or especially girls, who are sort of in that self doubt? I don't know if I need the permission or not of face. And you said, I would like to say to them that you are enough. And you don't have to stay in a certain box. It's time to throw that box. And that's exactly what you are telling your daughters as well. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. We are put into boxes. Society puts us, and then for us, and I'll speak specifically about the South Asian culture, the Punjabi culture. And by no means am I throwing a blanket statement that every single person is going through this.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
please, to anybody listening as well, this is not me painting our culture with a negative brush, but there is a pattern. If you really stand and reflect, there is a pattern. The messaging. Just listen to the top 5 songs that are out there today, and you'll notice a theme.
Mm,
And they're telling women where their value is, and men where their value is, right? So I think it takes a lot to unpeel that onion of, and you're somewhere deep in the core there, and to realize you might not even know who you are because you've been told by society, this is your expectation. You're going to do this and this, X, Y, and Z. And then after that, you get married, you have kids, and it would be great if one of them is a boy. And then, you go
yeah.
on, you have a career, but the career should accommodate the family. And you still should be able to be happy at the end of the day and cook and clean and take care of your in-laws and all of this stuff. So there's this, if you look at it in check boxes, there's an extensive check boxes where when it comes to women
Yeah.
versus males in our culture.
Yeah.
And so that would be my message, is to sit and think about, what have I been told and what is the truth? Because our way of life is not the only way of life. And that's the beauty of living in a place like Canada, because you get to see other ways of life.
Mm,
And then you get to shed some light into your dim corners of your mind to say, wait a minute, women here are not living like this, or in this particular one, or my colleague, and they're happy, they're content. So what's going on? To shake some of that and to demand respect for yourself. I think it's kind of like layers of brick being piled on us over and over again, and we just sort of cower under the burden. But I think if you stand up a little bit, you might see a different view. And I think pick and choose what is important to you. And I'm not saying throw out, everything that is there.
absolutely.
There's so much beauty there. But I think the pieces that ask you to reduce your light, question those.
Mm,
Because your light is not meant to be reduced. You're meant to shine. You were sent here on this earth. You're given this one beautiful life. What do you want to leave with? What do you want this world to leave with? That you made really round rotis, or what? Right?
yeah. Wow, so inspiring. And I love that you said that question the pieces that really stop you from shining bright. I love that. I really hope this instill that confidence and encouragement in people listening to this. So, and if anybody wants to reach out to you, Jyoti, can they reach out to you, just have a conversation
Yeah,
and kind of
absolutely.
share their journey with you, where they can
Absolutely.
connect?
I'm going to share that information with you. It would be most likely I would give my email address
Okay.
as the first means of connection.
Okay, perfect. I'll put the links to that in the show notes as well. So, Jyoti, before we get into the final segments, I want to briefly talk about your career that you are in. What made you go into that and what it's all about?
I think my lived and living experiences. So this, I shared the quote earlier with my favorite movie quote. That's always been sort of the fire burning inside of me is the injustice, whether it's against women, against people as a whole. What happened to my family is questioning that unfairness that happens in our society based on pieces of our identity that we don't choose. I didn't choose to be born a girl. I didn't choose to be born into a Punjabi Sikh family. But then my trajectory in life was impacted by that. And so a lot of people have that happen to them where there's pieces of themselves that are not their choosing, but they get treated differently in society because of it. So I've been in the area of giving voices to marginalized people who don't have that advantage, and fighting for their advantages. And because this society is not fair, we don't all live the same life. There are definitely systemic wrongs that have been happening historically that still happen to current day. So those are the fields that I've been in, in terms of equity, in terms of inclusion, belonging, anti-racism, and giving voices. And my work has mostly been in education. So whether it's having these conversations, facilitating curiosity, planting seeds in people's minds to say, just because something's been done a certain way does not mean it's right or that it should stay that way.
Absolutely.
So that would be my ask for everyone listening today is like start questioning some of those things that have become normalized in your life. Maybe there's a little inch of you inside that's like, I don't like the way this is. Dig a bit deeper. What's a different way to look at it and how can we shift that so that it doesn't create totally different outcomes for people?
Wow, I think you have articulated it perfectly. There's nothing to add from my end. So before we get into the final segment, I've added this new segment in this season. I call it Know Your Host, where I give my guests an opportunity to ask me any question they might have.
Oh, very interesting. You had mentioned in our conversation before this podcast recording about your own journey.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm actually interested as the baby of your family, the one and only son. What has changed for you? So go to cease from when he was 14. Let's say I'm going to pick an age where you're just coming into your sense of identity to now. What are your top two things that you've learned that have changed?
It's funny you said 14th, because 14 years of age, because that was exactly the time when my both sisters got married. I just turned 14. My both sisters got married, and it's just, my parents and me in the house. And I think that's where my biggest realization happened, that I just couldn't see my mother being the only person running in and out and doing everything and all the chores of the house. It really hit me. I don't know how or why me at such a young age observed that, even though my upbringing and my the the initial lessons sort of like taught to me were very patriarchal. But I don't know how it sort of hit me, but I think it was because it was my mother, and I was very close to her as well, and I just saw her, and I just couldn't fathom the way she was running in and out and serving chapati, serving rotis, and when the guests are there, cooking meals for like, I don't know, 100 people, and I'm like, why is this even happening? And what happened then? I started helping her with everything. Literally everything. I would help her serve the things and do this and that. And that's where I was questioned that, why are you doing it? Guys don't do it. Just stop it. And because I live in a joint family. And I was always questioned on some of the things that I was doing because, number one, I had two sisters and I saw that they had opinions, they had thoughts, because I was part of the closed room discussions where nobody else was. I was right there. I was a tiny tot. But I think, again, like you said, I could sense the energies. I could really I think I was a very, very good observer even back then. And I was able to really absorb few things which I couldn't question. But then I started doing it. And to the point of me coming to Canada and me started cooking myself and discovering a chef within me, that was also questioned by my own family initially.
Mm.
That, why are you cooking? Guys don't cook, whatever. And now it's been 6 7 years and I do it, and now they're proud of me. Oh wow, you can do this also, you can cook this also, this cuisine and that cuisine. So I think it really started right from the time when my sisters got married, that my this thought of why women has to do everything and why certain things are not are given permission to sort of to them to do. Why is that? Because I saw my sisters got married, I saw they had opinions, I saw that sometimes they are more of a decision maker than my brother-in-laws, their husbands. I saw that happen. And then they had children, I see how they were bringing their children up. So that really, I think, sort of shaped my understanding of it also. Then I came to Canada. And I think here, just getting exposed to people from all kinds of cultures, all sort of religions, and living in a shared spaces where I'm living with people from 6 different religions, which I never even heard about sometimes. And then I understanding their cultures, understanding their upbringings, and then you realize that, okay, there are a lot of things that were fed to me, sort of like shoved down my throat growing up, which are not serving me anymore. And I really have to unlearn. For example, not seeing a woman boss. Why is that? Whenever the word boss comes to my mind, why always picture a guy within a suit? Why is that? But
Mhm.
whereas I know my sisters are very strong, and I know the people I have met throughout my life, the women are extremely strong. Why is that? So I start questioning that. And I think that really impacted my initial years here in Canada, because I didn't know that these things exist. But then eventually I think I unlearned and relearned, and also realizing that it's okay to feel emotions, right? No matter the emotions are happy, sad, angry, creative, whatever. These are just emotion and they need to be embraced. That will benefit me today and in the future years, or the relationships I get into in my life, professional, personal, regardless. So yeah, these are
Mhm.
the few things I would say has really helped me become like a Gurasis 2.0 in Canada,
I love that.
which I didn't have the understanding or sort of the ability to question, or sort of even I'll tell you also the time to question. Because when
Mm.
you are in that space, you never really have the time to reflect. You are around so much noise, so much hustle and bustle happening around you, that I never got the personal time or the personal space to reflect until it came pandemic. And I actually had the time to reflect that, okay, what is it that's actually making me feel good and what is not making me feel good. So that's where I would say this is how my evolution has been, and thanks to me coming here and living in Canada. Yeah.
Mhm. That's so beautiful. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So, uh, go to CIS 2.0. Are you doing anything to in your areas of influence with the male members of your family? Let's say, be it your dad, cousins, that kind of a thing, brother-in-laws, to sort of have like a ripple effect. Because I think each of us is a beacon of power based on the people we touch. Right? I don't believe that we are powerless. So, anything in that regard?
I'll give you an example, which analogy basically I use a lot whenever I talk about speaking with elders. I say,
Mm.
imagine there's a 5-story building in front of you when you are like at your 25th, 26th, wherever the floor you are at. And if you want to renovate yourself, you can break it one by one and maybe you'll be able to do it. But on the
Mhm.
other side, if you'll mess with it too much, it's gonna fall right at you and you'll be hurt. So what I try to do is I find the middle ground where I can make those elder people understand my point of view at things. So that's how
Mm.
I've been doing it. Uh, for the younger generation, I would say, just because everybody is so much exposed to the internet today, I think a lot of my cousins and my family understand my point of views, where I'm coming from various topics. But I think it's the old generation I really make a conscious effort to sit with them and have those difficult conversations with them, to the point of women working, to the point of women, even though they don't like cooking, it's fine, or even to the point of getting together and starting a business. Why not? So
Mhm.
that's the point of things. I think I really make an effort to have a discussion within my family settings. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow, such unique questions. Thank you for that, Jyoti. All right. So now we're in the final segment. I call it Beneath the Accent. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. You can answer them in one word or a sentence or howsoever you feel like. The idea is just to know more about you. It's like a rapid fire. Okay.
Rapid fire.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what advice would you give to your younger self and at what age?
16, break some rules.
Okay. And what would you like to say to your 60-year-old self?
It's all okay.
Okay. Describe a moment when you experienced a significant cultural difference that surprised you.
The first time I saw someone put water on their husband's feet and drink it.
No way. Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
All sorts of feelings with that one.
Okay. That's so bizarre. Okay. What's that one dish from your home country that always brings you comfort and nostalgia?
Saag, makki di roti.
What's your favorite cultural festival or celebration in Canada? And how do you usually celebrate it?
At Diwali, I long for a Diwali in India that I'll remember because, of course, I was there the first 7 years, but I don't remember. Here, we celebrate by going to the Gurdwara, by going to our family's, my sister's house. And then my mom will always do a prayer. The kids get gifts, money usually. And it's just that collection of visiting people's houses, giving sweets, and this joyous moment of literally lighting, diyas, lamps around our house, in front of our house. And I think it's just full of hope and connection.
Okay. And any cultural festival in Canada that you celebrate?
I guess I celebrate Christmas to a point, not the religious aspect of it, but we put up a tree, we do
Okay.
the gifts. And again, it's more of the family and the connection piece of it together.
Okay. I see. If you had to describe yourself as any creature, what would it be and why?
I see myself as a lion.
Okay.
Sometimes with my big hair physically, but I think I have a very protective nature. And if there is something that I want to dig into and stand by, then my claws come out and I stand big and protect whatever it is behind me that I'm trying to protect.
Awesome. And if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Wow, that's a tough question. I'm trying not to go superficial, like the ability to fly or something, right? Because that would be a cool factor. I don't know if it would serve anybody anywhere with me flying around everywhere.
And then falling down with the weight of snow falling.
Yes. or being eaten by an eagle or something like that. I think it would be more the ability to mold. Because I think there's so much, we often say if the world had more women leaders, we would have less wars, better decision-making power. So not the ability to be able to read people's minds, but the ability to be able to convince people about the greater good, to solve some of our issues like poverty, and like these silly wars that we come up against, and we use those and focus on them rather than the real problems that the world has.
Okay.
I have to think about that one deeper. Maybe you'll get an email from me tomorrow.
Okay. If you could create this one law that everybody has to follow, what would it be?
Kindness. So before you open your mouth, before you make a decision, think about, is this helpful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And I think in there, you'll find who is it harming, and maybe you'll take a better decision.
Absolutely. So home is where the heart is. If you had to choose one thing that makes you feel most at home in Canada, what would it be?
Obviously, my family, my husband, children, my mom is where my home is. But if we're looking at non-human things, it would be a good cup of cha. Makes me feel
Okay. So finally describe Canada in one word or a sentence.
complex.
Why would you say that?
Complexity in everything, in the people, in the different cultures we have, in the changes that happen to people once they get off that airplane from the first time to the end of their time here. It's complex, and in complex is the good and the bad
Wow,
in
absolutely.
between.
Yeah. And if you could leave me, Jyoti, with one piece of advice, what would it be?
Keep doing what you're doing. I have to say, I only recently met you, but I am so proud of you for picking up the torch on this, and especially being a male. And you're doing it. Even the name of your podcast is just like you're putting whatever the stigma is in bright, shining lights and saying, here it is, and here is what someone with a thick accent is capable of doing, because I think you're being a beacon for people to discuss these issues, for individuals like myself to share our experiences, because I know that I'm not alone in my experience. You know, you're not alone in your experiences, and it just takes a few of us to rise up and discuss this and help others. So thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you for your kind words. And lastly, how would you describe your experience being on the podcast today?
Wonderful. I had no notes, but I had talked to you on the phone, so I was quite comfortable, and I knew it was going to be just a great conversation. And you have a very calming way, and you're vulnerable, so it allows your speaker to be vulnerable as well. So I appreciate that, and I hope you keep doing that and using your voice, right, for the greater good. But I think this is such a wonderful idea.
Absolutely. And was there something that you had like a certain expectation from the podcast? And how was it like?
My expectation was we're going to have a conversation about some important things, but because I'm the subject matter expert of my own life, I wasn't worried. No notes, no research was necessary. I'm speaking from my heart, my head. And that's exactly how it went. I'm looking at the time. I don't know where it went. It was very quick. And I thank you for that as well, for making it easy for me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for being on the podcast and adding value to me and to my listeners. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.